Hello, this is Jacqueline from Jack Knits, and today we're going to learn how to make the chunky classic mitten. It's a very quick, easy pattern to knit up. It's made with bulky weight yarn, so it creates a really nice, dense, thick, warm mitten. And because it's bulky weight yarn, it knits up really fast. I'm going to show you how to do the entire mitten, starting with the ribbing, the thumb gusset, the hand, decreases for the top of the hand, and the thumb. So let's get started on making the chunky classic mitten. All right, let's get started with knitting these chunky style mittens. I am using a bulky weight yarn. It's a number 5 on your little yarn scale here. And I'm using US size 10 double pointed needles. So if you're unfamiliar with working with double pointed needles, you can kind of follow along with how I'm doing that in this video. But if you want a more foundational video on how to get started with double pointed needles, I will have a link in the upper hand corner for my previous video on that, or in the description below. You can link to that, and it will give you a much more beginner instructions on how to work with double pointed needles. I'm also going to assume for this video that you know how to knit and purl and how to do the basic long tail cast on method. If any of those are unfamiliar to you, the complete videos instructions for those will also be in the description below. You can review those if you need a little refresher. So today we are going to be knitting these bulky weight mittens. We're going to start with the ribbing, and we're going to cast on 20 stitches for the ribbing here, and we will do that with the long tail cast on method. We'll just take one of our DPNs and give ourselves a long tail here, and we will cast on 20 stitches. Again, if you need a refresher on the long tail cast on method, feel free to watch that video. There's a link in the description below. Let's see, 5, 6. All right, 20 stitches I've put on one of my DPNs. Now we're going to just transfer those stitches to 2 additional needles, so 3 total. So let's put 8 stitches on one needle. 1, 2. We'll put 6 stitches on the next needle. And that leaves 6 for the third needle. All right, let's kind of move those stitches to the center of my knitting. And what I like to do to kind of make sure to join in the round is lay it down on a hard surface so it forms a triangle. And then you can make sure that your cast on edge is all on the inside of your triangle, so you're not twisting your stitches on any one of those needles. Then we're going to take our 4th needle in our right hand, and we're good with the tails of our working yarn coming off of this right hand top of the needle. Then we're going to start to knit the stitches off of our left needle with our 4th needle. So you can kind of pick them up here, grab your working yarn, not your tail, kind of put that out of the way, and let's start knitting these stitches. So to do the 1 by 1 ribbing, we're going to do a series of knit 1 stitch, then purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and we're going to do that all the way around our round. So let's start by knitting 1. We're just going to use these 2 needles for now, then purl 1, knit 1. The other needles are kind of flopping in the background, but just don't pay any attention to those for now. We'll get to those later. Knit 1, purl 1 all the way to the end of this needle. Then we will just kind of rotate our needles over to, so we can start knitting from the next needle. And we will again do a knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, and purl. All right, let's finish this round with our ribbing. Knit one, purling one. Okay, so now we're at the end of the round. You can tell it's the end of the round because we're back to where our tail was, which indicates the start of the round. So in this video, whenever I say knit to the end of the round, you're always going to knit all the way around all your needles until you get to the end where your tail is, and that will indicate the start of your round. So we're going to continue to do this for the entire length of our ribbing. Just keep knitting round and round, always starting with a knit stitch and doing a knit one, purl one all the way around. And we're going to do this for 12 rounds. You can make your cuff longer or shorter if you wish. I just chose to make it about a few inches long, and that was 12 rounds for me. But you know, you can adjust. You can make it longer or shorter, whatever your desire is. So let me work ahead a little bit. I'll continue this one by one ribbing round and round our DPNs for the entire length of the ribbing, and then we'll continue from there. All right, I've completed 12 rows of my ribbing. So now we're going to move on to the thumb gusset. But before we do that, I need to just knit a couple rows here of plain knitting. That's just going to get us the little distance we need before we start the thumb gusset. So let's just do that first. I'm going to knit a total of 3 rounds of just plain knitting. So we're going to just knit every stitch, no longer doing the knit one, purl one ribbing, but knitting every stitch. And we're going to do this for 3 rounds. And by the way, I forgot to mention earlier, if you like this yarn and these needles, by the way, these needles are really wonderful to work with. They're by Knitter's Pride, and I love them. They're nice and smooth and easy to handle. I will have a link in the description below where you can purchase these, both the yarn and the needles, if you like them. They're really nice to work with. So let me knit these 3 rounds, and then we'll be back and start the thumb gusset. All right, now we're ready to move on to the thumb gusset after I knitted 3 rounds of just plain knitting. Now the thumb gusset is referring to this little section here where we are doing increases in our fabric to make room for the thumb. So that's what the thumb gusset is. So we are going to be making increases every 3rd round, and then we will reach up to the top where we will actually start knitting the thumb. So that's what I'm referring to when I say the thumb gusset. Now, the only difference between the left and right mitten is the position of the thumb gusset. So this next round is going to be our setup round, where we're going to be actually placing some stitch markers in our round to indicate where we are doing the increases for the thumb gusset. So where those stitch markers are is the only difference between the right and the left mitten. I already completed the right mitten, and for the right mitten, the stitch markers were placed in this first needle here, and that's where our thumb gusset began. For the left mitten, our stitch markers are going to be placed on our 3rd needle around, and this is where our thumb gusset is going to be placed. So that is the only difference, is where we place these stitch markers. On subsequent rounds, my instructions will say knit to the first stitch marker. For the right mitten, it's just right in the first needle. For the left mitten, it's all the way around to the 3rd needle. So that's the only difference between the right and the left. If you want very specific step-by-step written instructions for these, a link to this pattern is in the description below. So feel free to link on that or click on that, and you can follow along with the pattern as well. So let's do this setup round where I mentioned we're going to be placing these stitch markers where we're going to be doing the increases for the thumb gusset. So for this round, for the left hand mitten, we are going to knit around until we have 3 stitches left on our round. That's way over here on the 3rd needle. So let's knit to that position, all knit stitches again. Okay, here we are on that 3rd needle. We're going to knit these first few stitches. Now we got 3 stitches left on our needle, and we're going to place our first stitch marker. These little rings are called stitch markers. They're going to just remind us where we do our increases on the subsequent rounds. Now we will knit 2 stitches, 1 and 2, and we will place our second stitch marker. And then we will knit to the end of the round, which is just 1 stitch left for the left hand mitten. If you were doing the right hand mitten, the end of the round would be, all the way back around, because the stitch markers would be on that first needle. Okay, so now we're at the end of the round. We've completed that setup round. Now we're ready to begin doing our first increase round. We're going to be doing increased rounds every 3rd round. So this first round, we're going to be doing an increase right after the first stitch marker and right before the second stitch marker. Then we're going to do 2 rounds where we're just plain knitting before we do our next increase. Okay, so this is our increase round. So we're going to start by knitting all the way to our first marker, which is way over here on our 3rd needle. So let's knit over to our marker. All right, knitting up to that marker. We'll go ahead and just slip that first marker, and now we're ready to do our first increase. And our first increase is going to be a make one right stitch. To do that make one right, we're going to take this strand that's right between our stitches, this horizontal strand of yarn, and we're going to pick it up with our right needle and place it on our left needle in this fashion, with the yarn coming from the left front to the back right. And then we're going to knit that stitch just like we normally would, right through the front. It's a little tight, so sometimes it's kind of tight to get that needle in it, but knit it just like you would any other stitch, and that is 1 increase. That was our make one right. Now we're going to knit to our next marker, 2 stitches at this point, and we will do our next increase, and our next increase is going to be a make one left. So we're going to again take that horizontal strand of yarn between our stitches, pick it up with our right needle and place it on our left needle, but this time we're going to place it on the opposite direction, so going from the back to the front. And now we will knit that stitch, but not through the front loop like this, but through the back loop in this fashion. Okay, that will be knitting through the back loop, and that is our make one left, another increase. Slip that marker, knit to the end of the round, knit to the end of the round, which is just that 1 stitch. Now we've increased our stitches between our markers by 2, so now we have 4 stitches between our markers. Okay, so that is the end of that increase round. Now we're going to do 2 more rounds of just plain knitting, no increases at this point, before we do our next increase. So let me do that a moment. All right, I've knitted 2 rounds with no increases. I just knitted all the way across, just slipping the markers as I went. So we're going to do that increase round 3 more times. Right now we've got 4 stitches. We're going to do another increase to make it to 6, then to 8, and then we're going to stop when we have 10 stitches between our stitch markers. And remember, after every increase round, we are just doing 2 rounds of knitting. Except for the last time we do that increase, we're not going to do 2 more rounds after that, after we get to 10 stitches between the markers. We will stop at that point. But let me do this next increase round together with you so you can see that one more time. We're knitting to our first marker of this round. Here's our first marker. We're going to slip that. We will again do a increase, a make one right. So pick up that strand, place it on our needle in this fashion. There we go. And knit it right through. Oh, I lost my stitch marker. Runaway stitch marker. Here we go. Knit it right through that stitch in the normal fashion. Knit to the next stitch marker. then do a make one left where we pick up that strand and place it on our needle in the opposite direction and knit it through the back loop for a make one left. And slip the marker and knit that last stitch. And now we have 6 stitches between our markers. We're going to do 2 more rounds of just knit, do another increase, 2 more rounds, another increase. At that point we'll have 10 stitches between our markers, and then we will go from there. So let me do all of that, and we'll come back when we are done with the gusset and we can move on to the hand. Okay, my entire thumb gusset is completed. I ended up with 10 stitches between my markers. After I did that increase round, I did not do any more just plain knit rows. I stopped at that point. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of a transition round that's going to set these thumb stitches aside so we can work on them later after we complete the hand. So let's do that. Let's take a round where we're going to set these stitches aside, then we'll be ready to work the hand. And here's how we're going to do that. At this point, you're going to need to have handy just a piece of scrap yarn threaded onto a darning needle. This is where we're going to place our thumb stitches onto the scrap yarn. So let's first knit again over to our markers for our thumb gusset. So let's knit over there. Let's knit these first 3 stitches to our stitch marker. We can remove the stitch marker at this point. Now let's take our scrap yarn onto our darning needle, and we're just going to slip these next 10 stitches, these thumb gusset stitches, onto this darning needle. So let's just take them one by one off the needle, off the knitting needle onto our darning needle, all the way to our marker. Thread that through. All right, so now they are sitting on this scrap yarn. Let's remove that second stitch marker. And we've got one more stitch to do here, but now you can see that we've got kind of this big gap here between these stitches over here and this one last stitch on this needle. Now I would really like to kind of fill in that gap with a couple extra stitches. So we're going to do that. We're going to actually cast on a couple more stitches to fill in that gap. We're going to cast on 4 stitches, and we're just going to do that with what is called a backward loop method. And here's how we're going to do that. Kind of hold on to this needle so we don't lose this stitch here, okay? But just take your thumb on your working yarn and wrap your thumb underneath your working yarn. So it's wrapped around your thumb in this fashion. Now take this needle in your right hand and bring it up through that hole that you made with your thumb. Slip your thumb out and pull it snugly, not too snugly, but firm enough to that needle. So that was one stitch we casted on. Let's do another one. Wrap our thumb around our yarn, insert our needle up through that thumb hole, and place on our needle. So that's 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now we've got some additional stitches that's going to nicely make this a round circle for our thumb. So now we can finish this round with that last stitch, and now we have a nice completed little thumb spot here. Those stitches are being held for us later on this scrap yarn, so they'll just kind of hang out there till we're ready for them. Now we're just going to continue working with the hand. And with the hand, it is just simply knitting all the stitches around and around. So let's knit for a little bit on this round, and I'm going to show you how you can tell how long you want to make your hand. I have it on in my pattern, let's see, to make it a total of 15 rounds for the hand, and that is long enough for me, but you might need to make it a little bit longer. But here's how you can tell. At this point, what's really what's really nice about knitting mittens is you can kind of try on the mitten as you go. So let's kind of insert our hand here. Oh, it's actually the left hand. And we can kind of see that it's fitting nicely so far. And we're going to want to continue these hand rounds all the way up till it gets just past our pinky finger. And that's where we know when we can start to do the decreases for the top of the hand. So again, for me, that was 15 rounds. For you, that may be a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on the size of your hand. And then you can go from there. So let me do those 15 rounds, and then we'll get ready to do the decreases for the top of the hand. All right, my 15 rounds are complete for the hand. We know that we're kind of done with the hand before the decreases, because as I mentioned, if you try it on, if my hand stitches here get to be just above the pinky, so you can see that it's just above where my pinky is, and there we know that we are ready to start the decreases. So let's first again do a little setup round by placing a stitch marker so we know where in the round we want to do our decreases. Now when we've been working on the hand, we've actually have 22 stitches on our needles instead of 20 when we started, because with the thumb gusset a couple extra stitches were added, which is fine, but that gives us a little bit more room for the hand. So now let's do our setup row to get ready for the decreases. So we are going to stitch for 11 stitches, which is half of 22 what we have on our needles, and then we're going to place a stitch marker. So let's stitch 11 stitches, knit stitches again. Okay, this is 9, 10, and 11. Let's place a stitch marker here, and we can finish the round with the other 11 stitches. Okay, so now our stitch marker is in position where we know we're going to be doing our decreases. So for our decrease rounds, we are going to be actually doing a decrease at the start of the round and at the end of the round, but also before and after our stitch marker. Okay, so on this needle, we're going to be doing a few decreases on this. So I'm going to need a couple extra stitches on this needle. So I'm just thinking ahead a little bit there, and I'm going to just transfer a couple stitches from the other needles to that second needle so we have enough to do our decreases. So I'm just moving 2 stitches over from the third needle and 2 stitches from this first needle. That's just going to set us up better to do those decrease rounds. Okay. All right, so let's do our decrease round. We're going to do a couple different decrease stitches, and I'll show those as we go. We will start our decrease round with a knit 2 together. The very first 2 stitches of our round we're going to knit together. So to do that, instead of just placing your needle into one stitch, we're going to place our needle through both of those first 2 stitches. So going through both those stitches and knitting those 2 together and taking them off their needle. So now those 2 stitches became 1. That was 1 decrease. Now we're going to stitch knit stitch till we have 3 stitches before our stitch marker. So that's over on needle number 2. So let's go over here. Okay, so now we've got 3 stitches before our marker. So these 2 we're going to decrease together, and this time we're going to do a slip slip knit decrease, and this is how you do that. We're going to slip the first stitch as if we're going to knit, just slip it from one needle to the other. Do the same thing with the next stitch. Now we're going to start to transfer those stitches from our right needle to the left just by moving them in this way, but stop at this point because now we're going to be knitting these 2 together through this back loop right where our needle is. So keep your needle in that position and knit those 2 together through the back loop, and that decreases that stitch by 1. That was a slip, slip, knit decrease. Now we're going to stitch to our marker, that last stitch, knit 1, slip the marker. Now we will do a knit 2 together on this decrease stitch as well. So right after the marker, do another knit 2 together. Now we're going to knit to 3 stitches before the end of the round, and that's when we will do our last decrease stitch for our decrease round. All right, 3 stitches before the end. Here we're going to do another one of those slip, slip, knit stitches. So slip, slip, transfer them over to the left needle and knit those 2 together through the back loop and knit that last stitch. Okay, so that was a decrease round. Now we're going to do 1 row of just plain knitting before we do the next decrease round. All right, now we're ready to do another decrease round after I did 1 just plain knit round. So we're going to follow that same sequence of decreases where the very first 2 stitches we're going to knit 2 together, knit 2 3 stitches before the marker, and we'll do a slip, slip, knit here, slip, slip, and knit 2 together through the back loop, knit 1, slip the marker, do another knit 2 together. Now we'll knit to 3 stitches before the end of the round. And here we will do another slip, slip, knit, slip, slip, knit, and finish the round with 1 knit stitch. Okay, I'm going to do another knit round, then I'm going to do that decrease round 1 more time, and then we'll wrap it up with our final little decrease round. All right, here's what I did so far. I did another knit round, then 1 more decrease round, and another just plain knit round, to the point where now I have 10 stitches left on my needle. So now our very final decrease round is just going to be knitting 2 together all the way around. We're going to decrease our 10 stitches down to 5, and then we will cut our thread and wrap it up and close up that hole at the top. So let's just go around knitting 2 together all the way around. We'll start with these 2. These last couple knit 2 togethers are kind of hard to do on these last couple stitches, but just do knit 2 together all the way around, and we'll see when we only have 5 stitches left. All right, we only have 5 stitches left on all of our needles. I've cut my yarn, and now we're ready to just close up that gap. We're going to take that yarn that we just cut, our tail here, and thread that onto our darning needle. And we will just slip these final 5 stitches from our knitting needle onto this darning needle. So just remove the needles and the stitches as you get to them. And now you can just pull that nice and tight to close up that final hole at the tip of your hand, bringing that needle in through the center so we can bring that tail to the inside and weave that in when we are all done. So let me just tuck this needle inside, and we are done with the hand. So now all that is left to do is to come back to this thumb that's been waiting for us. We're going to wrap up these thumb stitches, and then we will be all done. Home stretch here. All right, the final step in our mitten project is to finish this thumb. So we have it nicely waiting for us here. We've got a nice little circular piece. What we're going to be doing is placing these stitches back onto our DP ends. So now we will be knitting a little small circumference of knitting to produce our thumb. And then cinch it up at the end. So let's place these stitches back on 3 DP ends. We're going to start here with these stitches that we casted on originally when we closed up that gap. Remember, we did those 4 cast on stitches? So let's take our needle and insert them into these 4 stitches. You can kind of identify them. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just insert our needle into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here we go. And now let's take our stitches that are held by this scrap yarn and place them on 2 more needles. So just insert those stitches back on a DP end. Let's put 4 stitches on this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 6 stitches on this one. I like to have an even number of stitches on each needle because the very final round of our thumb is going to be knitting 2 together all the way around, and this just makes it easier to have an even number on each needle if we set it up this way. All right, now we can remove this scrap yarn and we can begin to now knit our thumb. So to do that, we of course need a new set of working yarn. So just take the working yarn again, and we're going to just start to knit with this. I like to, when I start with a new piece of yarn, I like to wrap it around my finger a little bit to give it a little stability. Then we can pick up our 4th needle and begin to knit. I'm going to start with these cast on stitches and knit these first. So we'll knit these 4 stitches, but I want you to notice something on the way that these stitches are on our needle. You'll see that they look a little backwards. Normally a knit stitch is on the needle the other way, orientated the other way, and these are kind of on their backwards. But we can fix that as we knit, because we can knit them through the back loop instead of the front loop, and that's going to correct our orientation. So for these first 4 stitches only, knit those through the back loop, and that's going to correct how those stitches are on our needle. Okay? All right, now we'll continue to knit around the rest of these stitches. These you can knit in the regular way because they're correctly on our needle. And then the final stitches on our 3rd needle. And we will start another round. Let's pause here just a moment because look at this tail that we started with. We do not want this tail to be on the outside of our mitten. We want to make sure it's on the inside to weave in later. So let's take this nice long tail and tuck it into this thumb gap. Bring it out through the cuff so that is not in our way anymore, okay? And then one nice thing about it, we can use this tail to kind of tug and tighten up that first stitch when we knit. Because when we're knitting that first stitch of this row, since that was a new piece of yarn here, this first stitch, see, it's really loosey-goosey. So when we knit it, you can knit the second one here too, we want to tighten that stitch up, and then you can just pull on that tail and that will tighten that stitch up nicely. Okay, so let's now knit around this row. We're going to continue to knit around and around for our thumb for a number of rounds until it reaches just past your thumb. And again, you can test that out by trying on the mitten, and when your thumb, let's do that a minute here, try on your mitten here, and when your thumb gets as just past the tip of your thumb, then you can do your final decrease round. So for me, that was, I believe, 12 rounds. 12 rounds for the length of my thumb. I've got kind of a relatively short thumb, so it might take more rounds for you to do that, just depending on the length of your thumb. So I will see you when I'm done with these 12 rounds, then we'll finish up the thumb and then do a little cleanup on the inside of the mitten to make everything look great. See you in a moment. All right, let's wrap this up. I've completed my 12 rounds of my thumb. Let's do our final round, and that's going to be a decrease round where we are knitting 2 together all the way around. So let's knit every 2 stitches together all the way around our thumb. All right, so now we just have 2, 4, 7 stitches left on our needle, and we will again cut a tail, thread it onto our darning needle, and let's remove these stitches from our knitting needles onto the darning needle so we can cinch up the thumb just like we did for the top of the hand. So take each stitch off the needle, thread it onto your darning needle, and close it up, and let's stick that needle inside just like we did with the hand. And let's turn the whole thing inside out because there's a couple things that I want to do to clean up this inside to kind of tidy things up a little bit. So first of all, you're going to want to weave in your ends from here and from the end of your thumb and also from the very start. I'm not going to take the time in the video to do that, but I do want to show you how to weave in this end at the start of your thumb. If you notice, I've got a little gap here and a little couple gaps here on the corners of the thumb gusset, and that's pretty normal. You're going to get that no matter how tight you think you've knitted around that. There's going to end up being a little bit of a gap. So we're going to take advantage of having to weave in this end by just taking our needle and yarn here and stitching that to close that up a little bit. So we've got our yarn right here at this gap here. Let's just take our needle. We don't have to do anything fancy. Just take our needle and grab one stitch from one side, another stitch from the other side of that gap, and kind of just close it up a little bit. Just do a little tidying up. See? All better. Now let's move our needle across our thumb to our other little gap that we want to fix. So we just have to get our working thread over there, and now let's kind of close up these few holes. Let's just bring from one side of the hole to the other. Again, nothing fancy, just kind of stitching up our mess there. All right, now that that is tidied up, we can also now just weave in the ends here. And like I said, you would do that with your other ends as well. And we can snip this. And when you're done with those other ends, just turn it right side out again. And we can admire our finished mitten. So there's our left mitten, here's our right mitten, and we've got a beautiful set of chunky, extra warm, beautiful mittens. I hope you give these mittens a try. They really are quite simple to do, and they don't really take that much time at all. So thanks for watching, everybody. If you'd like, please subscribe to this channel. You'll get all sorts of videos on knitting tips and tutorials, also crocheting tips and tutorials as well. So thanks for watching, everybody, and happy knitting.